When it comes to leaks, Ubisoft has by far the worst luck. That, or they deliberately have their games leaked. I'm not even sure which one I believe. It's mad. Before Ubisoft Forward, Far Cry 6 leaked, so at Ubisoft Forward the reveal that was supposed to surprise us didn't. And I must say it would appear as if Far Cry is going back to basics a little bit. What I mean by this is ever since Far Cry 3, Far Cry has had a bit of an odd run. Far Cry 4's good, I quite like Far Cry 4. Far Cry Primal was a caveman game set in the Far Cry 4 map, and I'm honestly not sure who thought that was a good idea because the game is dull. Far Cry 5 is fine, though at times it does run a little bit dry. The game doesn't necessarily feel as refined as Far Cry 3 and 4 did. And then Ubisoft pulled the classic Ubisoft and recreated Far Cry 5 as Far Cry New Dawn. Same map, everything's pink, and of course there are light RPG elements in the game that are just completely out of place. And I'll be honest, I couldn't really bring myself to play more than an hour or two because it's just the same game that I experienced in Far Cry 5, besides from the enemies feeling a little bit more spongy, and honestly I can't deal with that. If anything, it's really reassuring to know that with Far Cry 6, at least we found out that Ubisoft can indeed count to 6. In the past, Ubisoft has trailed off and started subtitling all their games as opposed to giving them a number. But I'll be honest, there is something incredibly satisfying about the simplicity of numbers. I think it's fair to say, while other franchises made by Ubisoft have fluctuated significantly, Far Cry has managed to at least remain semi-decent. However, were I to choose which Far Cry I liked the most, the answer would of course be Far Cry 3. When someone mentions Far Cry to me, Far Cry 3 is the first game that pops into my head. For me, this was Far Cry at its best, so when I ask the question, is Far Cry 6 going back to basics, I mean the basics of what works for Far Cry, similar to how we see it presented in Far Cry 3. So, here's what we know about Far Cry 6 so far. The game takes us to an impoverished, modern Caribbean island known as Yara. Or Yara, or however you pronounce that, I honestly don't care, which is under the control of a dictatorship, the dictator being Far Cry 6's antagonist Anton Castillo, portrayed by Giancarlo Esposito, who you probably know for his work in some well-known shows. And he wants to reforge Yara into his idea of paradise, which from his perspective is the country's former glory. However, according to the Ubisoft website, Anton will sacrifice his own people to forge this paradise if he has to. With Far Cry villains, they have to have more to them than being bad just for the sake of it, and there does appear to be a little bit of nuance to this one, as Anton has a son named Diego, who in the trailer Anton is trying to teach Diego a lesson, comparing the people of Yara to a grenade in the sense that if you don't hold the people tight, they will explode. So our dictator friend Anton is a little bit mental, because who gives their own son a grenade? The antagonist in this game appears to have a noble goal. He wants to see his nation prosper. He also clearly wants to teach his son how to rule over the people, or to lead, but I suppose his methods of attempting to achieve this paradise he so desperately wants winds up neglecting and oppressing the people he's meant to serve, and as a result he becomes an antagonist that way. So it looks like there's going to be a bit of a revolt kicking off, and that's probably where we come in. There's a lot of emphasis on the antagonist in the marketing, and honestly that's what I'd expect from a Far Cry game. And the Ubisoft website appears to present the perspectives of both the people of Yara and Anton himself, so I'd imagine the story would deal in those perspectives too. So whatever the marketing is trying to do here, what it's actually suggesting to me is that the narrative will have depth. And while I can't sit here and say that Joseph Seed, for example, didn't have depth, I can say that I didn't necessarily enjoy exploring that as much as I did with characters like Vars. Because when it came to Far Cry 5 and Far Cry New Dawn as well, especially, there's what felt like less focus on the antagonists and more focus on the craziness of the open world and the gameplay. Not to a point where the antagonists got lost, but to the point where it didn't really feel like they had that Far Cry villain effect. I already have confidence in the villain for Far Cry 6 because I get the feeling that this is a Far Cry antagonist. I hope that makes sense and I haven't just been driveling on. Moving on, we got some screenshots for Far Cry 5 already. We haven't seen gameplay, but we have seen stills. It looks incredibly grounded and the colours aren't too offensive, like all that excessive pink certainly was in New Dawn, and the grounded look to these screenshots remind me more of what Far Cry 3 and Far Cry 4 did. There's no gimmicks in these screenshots, it's just pure environmental glory, and it just gives us an impression of the tone of the game, and it just feels more akin to the Far Cry that I love, and again is giving me incredibly heavy Far Cry 3 and 4 vibes, which is to say it's probably a bit more gritty and realistic. When I look at what we know of this game, I don't feel like I'm going to encounter a diabetic bear named Cheeseburger and recruit him to my hearty murder crew and then go and massacre a bunch of cultists. I feel like if there's anything we know, it's that the tone of the game is going to be a bit more serious and gritty than it perhaps has been in Far Cry 5 and New Dawn. And on top of that, it would appear as if the visuals are nice as well. I can't imagine the game will be without its humorous moments. After all, there is a disabled dachshund in this game called Chorizo, who I'm sure will be an absolute fucking serial killer. But you get my point, I don't feel like this game is going to try to establish too much self-awareness, too much humour, and will take itself seriously and tell us a narrative intertwined with the villain Anton and his San Diego, and won't try to be a mindless open world first person shooter that at times Far Cry 5 and New Dawn felt like. We don't know much at all about the game, we haven't even seen gameplay yet, and the screenshots, like them or not, they're not really that representative because screenshots always do look nicer than how a game plays, as is my experience with promotional screenshots anyway. And the extra content listed in the additions that we know of doesn't really give us much information either. It did suggest that there would be some microtransaction tomfuckery, and honestly, Ubisoft, what did you expect? But we don't know much about how Far Cry 6 is going to play, this is all just based off interpretation, I guess. Already Far Cry 6 has piqued my interest in ways that Far Cry 5 and New Dawn hadn't, so I'm hopeful that this game is a more traditional Far Cry experience, not necessarily in a way that makes it the same as Far Cry 3 and 4, because let's be real here, every game needs to have its own identity, and franchises change and evolve, that's just how it goes. But I'm just hopeful that they managed to give us a Far Cry game that actually feels like a Far Cry game, and so far what we've seen would indicate that that is what Ubisoft is intending to go for. I know better than to have too high expectations for anything when it comes to video games, so I can't necessarily say that my expectations are high, but I will say that my fingers are crossed. I don't know what else there is to talk about when it comes to Far Cry 6, because that's more or less all that we actually know. We don't know very much at all. I am keen to find out more. This is a game that has piqued my interest for sure. When we see proper gameplay, I'm sure that'll be a make or break moment. If it's good, I'll be interested. If it's not so good, then well, shite to it. As of right now, the release date set for Far Cry 6 is the 18th of February 2021, and it'll be available on PlayStation 4, PlayStation 5, Xbox One, Xbox Series X, Stadia, and PC via the Epic Games Store and Uplay. So that's plenty of time for us to see bits and pieces of this game in between, and I'm sure we'll find out more before the launch date, obviously. So I guess it's about waiting for Ubisoft to be ready to drop that information. Anyway, let me know what you think down in the comments section. Thank you all for watching this video, I hope you enjoyed. Be sure to go ahead and leave a like, subscribe, share the channel with your friends and all that wonderful stuff, that would be fantastic. And with any luck, I'll catch you all very soon with another video at some point, but until next time, goodbye.